Welcome, everyone. We are so glad to have you with us today for a very special presentation. My name is Charlene Margot, and I'm co-founder of the Parent Venture, which is a nonprofit organization based in Silicon Valley, and founder of the Parent Education Series, now in its 16th year. Today, we're going to be talking about friends, frenemies, and friendlier friends, navigating school social dynamics, which really there could not be a more important topic when talking about kids than friendships, making friends, keeping friends, losing friends. So we're just really excited to have with us today two experts in social emotional learning, and especially children and friendship dynamics, Phyllis Bagel and Ana Hamoyan. Thank you both for being with us today. If you would like Spanish interpretation, we have Rosie Issel with us today. There are instructions in chat, so click on chat for instructions in Spanish. You can also click on the globe icon and Spanish to hear the Spanish interpretation. Special thanks to today's sponsors, Carlmont PTSA, Sequoia Union High School District, Redwood City School District, Sequoia Healthcare District, and Peninsula Healthcare District. We would not be here today without your generous sponsorship. Again, special thanks to our presenters, Ana and Phyllis, and we are just delighted that they can be with us today. We actually planned this several months ago, and November seemed like a long way away, and here we are. A few little logistics before we get started. Most of you by now are familiar with Zoom, but for those of you who may not have joined a webinar before, that's today's format. So there's two ways to engage with us. You'll see both a chat button at the bottom of your screen, which is a place for you to talk to one another, talk to us. My co-founder, Bev Hartman, will be sharing resources in the chat, so do look for that. Questions as we're going through today, we'd love to hear from you, but put your questions in the Q&A button if you would, and please keep them kind of short. We will try to get to as many of them as we can. So the format is we're going to be having a conversation with questions that have come in previously for about the first 40, 45 minutes, and then we're going to open it up to you, the audience, for additional questions. So please do save some questions, put them in anytime in that Q&A button. We will be checking throughout the hour that we have together. All right, let me tell you a little bit about today's presenters. Phyllis Bagel has worked in both public and private schools with students in grades K through 12. She currently works full-time as the school counselor for Sheridan School in Washington, D.C., and provides therapy to children, teens, and adults in private practice. Phyllis is a journalist and the author of Middle School Matters. She is a frequent contributor to the Washington Post on counseling, parenting, and education, and she's also written for Psychology Today, Time, and Your Teen. And her work has been shared in the New York Times, the Atlantic, the New Yorker, the Boston Globe, among other popular media outlets. Phyllis attended Dartmouth College, the Medill, I don't get that name right, Phyllis, the Medill School of Journalism in Northwestern University, and Johns Hopkins University with an MS in counseling. She lives in Bethesda, Maryland with her husband and 3 children, ages 18, 16, and 11. So you must be practicing your own advice, Phyllis.
Yeah.
Ana Hamoyan is the founder of the San Francisco Bay Area-based Green Ivy Educational Consulting, an educational consulting firm that works with parents, educators, and students on promoting executive functioning skills, including organization and time management and overall wellness. She is the author of 3 acclaimed books. That crumpled paper was due last week, The Myth of the Perfect Girl, and Social Media Wellness. She is also the founder and executive director of Luminaria Learning Solutions, a nonprofit developing the Life Navigator middle school programs to give students the skills for social and emotional mobility, as well as social and emotional wellness. Ana is a graduate of Duke University, and she holds a master's in counseling and pupil personnel services credentials. Please join me in a really warm virtual welcome for Ana and Phyllis. So glad you are with us today.
Thanks for
having me. Thank you for being here. Let's start with an easy one, shall we? Since a return to in-person school, this parent says, there's been a big shakeup in school social dynamics. Do you think things will get back to normal anytime soon?
I'll have you take that, Phyllis. We'll start and then I'll join in.
Okay, so the question was, and I will admit I froze for a few seconds there, but I think the question was, will we go back to normal anytime soon? And I don't think so. And actually, I'm not even sure that we want to go back to what we were doing pre-pandemic. I don't think that we were prioritizing necessarily the right skill sets, the right kinds of relationships, and the right kinds of just interpersonal interactions. We want to be encouraging those ties among our kids. I love the topic for today because I think if nothing else, what we want to really be focusing on now as we are helping kids come back mid-pandemic, we're still mid-pandemic, probably it will be a few years before things even remotely resemble what we remember from before, if ever, to really focus on helping them feel a sense of belonging, help them figure out who they need to be with to feel connected to just a community, not only socially, but a community of learners as well.
Yeah, and one of the things that I've seen for many of the students is that they had 12 to 18 months where there was a lot of uncertainty around everything around school, and activities, especially in the Bay Area, were canceled. And so now they're going back at a level that sort of mimics before, but A, they're not ready for it. B, I don't think it was right before. And C, it also affects their exhaustion and how they show up socially. So one of the things that we have to do is also step back and help kids figure out, okay, even if that was what was happening before, that doesn't mean that it needs to be what's happening now. And what are the values that you're looking for in your friendships and your friendship dynamics? How do you want to spend time with friends? And how do you build friendships in and out of school? For kids right now, they've now had a couple years where they haven't had normal experiences day to day in person socially. And yet we think they're eighth graders, but really their last experience fully in person was fifth grade. It's particularly true where we live because many of our students were remote for much of last year. And if they were hybrid, it was a very truncated experience that was even more challenging from an executive functioning standpoint. So I think that to Phyllis's point, there's no going back to normal, and it's not normal anymore.
And I think too, in terms of talking to our kids about this, I think it's so discombobulating to have this chronological passage of time without all of the corresponding events. And one of my seventh graders, and I keep quoting her because it was just such an insightful comment, said that she feels like she only got to lease age 11. It was just poof. She was 12. Everyone looked different. She looked different. No one felt comfortable in their bodies. She wasn't sure who her friends were. And she didn't feel like she got to own the experience. And so I do think that everything we think about, especially with kids in that really those vulnerable tween years, really even third grade and up, they really need to reestablish those ties and also figure out where they fit into the pecking order at a time when, as Anna said, they're younger in the way they present, their social skills have taken a hit, and they're so much more sensitive because they are having a harder time interpreting feedback as it is. And then you add the masks on top of it.
Such good points, Phyllis. I talked with Vanessa Kellum from Health Connected, who does sexuality education. And like she's saying to parents, school stopped, but your child's physical development did not stop. So it really must be quite a shock, right? Coming back as a 12-year-old.
And even for eighth graders, I was speaking to another psychologist recently who was saying that his eighth grader came back, and the last time he was out on the blacktop playing with other kids, he was the small sixth grader. And now he's the big eighth grader, and he's had this huge growth spurt, and he's having a really hard time playing without knocking the smaller kids down. He just doesn't yet feel like he owns the body or occupies the body he's in.
Boy, that is really a tough one. And all those babies, toddlers who hadn't seen any people for 2 years, right? So this is a really good question. I am very eager to hear what you have to say about this one. How much does my child's temperament impact their ability to make friends? My child is an introvert at school, but more extroverted at home.
So Phyllis and I were talking about this yesterday, and I think she made a really good point. She's like, sometimes in general, what we assume our kids are doing in school or how they are may not be 100% of what actually happens, right? So that's one. But The other piece is that kids could be more introverted right now, particularly going back to school, especially as they're navigating things and maybe so much has happened online and they're overly processing each experience. But the big thing to think about is temperament really impacts how students can fit into a social community. And maybe for some kids, they're better off one-on-one or in small groups, and going back into a larger classroom, say 20 or 30 students, can feel overwhelming when they don't have solid or deep connections with those students. And another piece is at lunch, they can have this, challenge of what do I do during lunch? I visited a school last week in Milwaukee, and I was so impressed. They have this whole lunch situation where everybody is assigned, but it changes every month. So the goal is that everybody interacts with each other, but also has a place to sit. And then with COVID, they've actually, it's like, 4 to 6 kids. And I think that that's one of the things that most people don't realize around the anxiety kids feel. But I think with a temperament, what we really want to do is look for opportunities for kids to connect that may not happen in school all the time, because the sheer number of students or the classroom dynamics may not allow for that one-to-one connection or those in-depth connections that those kids who maybe feel more introverted may be seeking. Maybe they're more thoughtful, maybe they're more reflective. And so maybe there are things outside of school. There are different activities you could look at, art classes, youth clubs, just anything, right? Use them as a collaborator on how they can find a community where they can, again, connect, feelings of connection, even if it's not in the classroom. And I think that's the big thing that I want people to go away from, is that just because things at school aren't maybe going well, there's got to be multiple other places where your child feels a sense of connection, whether it's with cousins, whether it's with extended family members, whether it's with family friends, whether it's with the soccer team or, the school or the orchestra, whatever, karate class, just that they have 1 to 2 other things.
I think that's really, I'm sorry, go ahead, Phyllis.
I was just going to piggyback on what Anna said to point out that it's really protective when kids have friends in more than one setting. Even if they are really social, it's helpful to have maybe a camp friend or to have a neighbor who you like to hang out with. It doesn't have to be the same age. And the only other piece I would add to what Anna was just suggesting is that parents do have to stop and ask whether it's a problem or it's their own anxiety. I think that in that haste to get back into the groove and figure out where kids fit, and they're worrying about it, and we as parents assume that anxiety on their behalf as well, to really take a deep breath and remind ourselves that it doesn't have to happen overnight. It can take time. And as long as they are attempting to make connections with people and they're trying to carry on normal conversations and they're having opportunities to practice their social skills, they don't necessarily have to have an Insta group or an Insta best friend or an Insta couple of best friends. And I think we can really help our kids if we reassure them that it might take some time.
I like that, joining the Insta group. Yeah, Anna.
I also think that most kids and most adults don't realize that everybody is navigating this right now and struggling with some element of it, whether it's returning to friendships, whether it's friendships have changed, whether it's expectations and friendships have changed. And I think that's also helpful. I mean, we also talk about the fact that, research shows middle school moms tend to be the most stressed out group of parents. And when I talk to moms, and, particularly around the time when I was writing the Myth of the Perfect Girl, a lot of it came up that they read The Myth of the Perfect Girl for their daughters, but they saw themselves in it. And part of what was so hard about that time was navigating the social dynamics and reliving their own experiences. So to Phyllis's point, exactly that. It's like, how much of it is this anxiety that parents feel versus the actual experience of kids? Because sometimes kids can be fine with their 1 to 2 close friends, and yet we'll see parents who are very nervous about that.
And so would you both advise actually bringing that up with your own child? If you do have, for example, a shy or introverted kid, would you say, I know it can be a little bit harder for you to make new friends, and would you like some ideas? How would you approach it with a kid?
I think starting with empathy is really helpful. And what we want to make sure is that we're not in any way communicating that we're disappointed in them or that we are worried that they're not up to the task of making friends. I think the messaging should always be, it's about finding the right fit. It's about finding people who appreciate your gifts. It's about finding people who you feel comfortable with. And then validating that it's hard to do that. And it's really hard to take social risks. I think as adults, we can forget how hard it is. If you think about the analogy of a ladder, the rungs on the ladder, the steps that you take to make a friend, we might go straight to, there's a new kid in school, she's looking for friends. You need a friend, call her up, invite her over for a sleepover. Whereas we may need a lot more rungs on that ladder to help a child, especially one who's a bit on the shy side.
Yeah.
First, make eye contact. And then when they see them in the cafeteria, maybe say, what are you eating for lunch? And then at another day, ask them if they like movies, and another day ask them if they'd ever want to come watch a movie with them, but not yet invite them, and then work their way up to actually sending that text. But it can take longer than makes a lot of sense to us as adults, but it's hard. It is hard to put yourself out there.
I think that's really great advice. So here's a question. If we could solve this one, ladies, we would really have it. And I know, Anna, you've written about this extensively. Parent asks, we're concerned that our teens spend so much time on their phones, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. Are their virtual friends as real as their in real life friends?
Well, I mean, one thing I want to say, and Phyllis and I again talked about this, is that a lot of our students and a lot of the students that I talk to, a good deal of the people they're communicating with online are people they see every day. There are some that maybe that's a camp friend or something, but the bulk of what my students are doing, again, there are outliers, there are things we should be concerned about that, but the bulk of it is that kids, that they're just maintaining those relationships with people. And during the pandemic, they were maintaining the relationships with people they weren't seeing in person. The other piece to that is that, a place that parents can be helpful is to support that those online communications for people that are local take place also in person, so that they encourage in-person regatherings if you feel safe with that. Because I think what got lost for many students developmentally in the pandemic is their social life turned online. So, we would hear about this before the pandemic. In the years that I was writing about social media, it's like, I have those friends that I talk to on Messenger after school every day. This happened in the early 2010s, 11s, 12s. But when we see each other in the hallway, we don't say hello. What kind of friendship is that, right? So identifying what are, their friends, who are their friends that they communicate with, what are the values that they have in friendship. And another example is people who game with their friends online, right? Yeah. They consider that's a form of communication. They're communicating. Now, the separate piece to that is like online people you don't know, right? And if we think about that as adults, right? A lot of people have found community and support in different groups online that they may not interact with or ever meet in person, right? I used this example last night in a presentation where, if you had a child who was sick and like a young child who is sick, and you're part of a parent or caregivers group of people dealing with the same illness, that can be wholly supportive, even if you never meet those people in person.
Yeah.
To that edge, students who are dealing with navigating different things and may have a community online that they couldn't have in person, those could be supportive friends. The key is, are these experiences energizing and draining or draining? If they're draining or toxic or overwhelming, that kids know that they can opt out of them, that they know that they can block, reject, delete, that they have power in who they communicate with online. And the other thing is to think about, what do they feel like they're getting from the friendship, like give and receive, right? Do they feel like they're getting support? Do they feel like they're getting a sense of community? Those are important for online and in real life. And so in this moment where the last 18 months, so much of socialization took place online, we're almost in this transition period where we can't say one is better than the other. We just want to help students maintain a sense of connection and belonging to people that are safe and trusted.
That makes sense. Anna, I know I've heard you say before to have kids look at their online interactions about whether they energize them or drain them. And I think that's a good delineator. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. This is a question a little bit more technical, but I think it's really important in terms of social emotional development. Both of you, can you talk for a minute about how emotional regulation is related to a child's ability to make friends?
Yes, I'm sure we both could talk a lot about this, but I think a lot of kids are pretty dysregulated right now. I've been saying, no, somebody jokingly quoted me, but it's true, we're not well. Nobody is particularly well right now. And when you're not feeling great about yourself, or you're not sure what your social standing is, you're more likely to make a decision that you'll regret, to act impulsively. We know kids who have attentional challenges are even more at risk of acting impulsively. And of course, the choices they make not only can hurt their own reputation, it also can hurt their friendships, and it can get in the way of their ability to keep friends. And the way kids are struggling, the way that I'm seeing them struggle is it could be physical, it could be quick to shove somebody, it could be that someone looks at them the wrong way and they blurt out something mean that they shouldn't say. And then I see a lot of remorse. The kids really do want to make it right. They almost don't even know why they did what they did or said what they said. They know it's getting in their way. So I think as parents, one of the things that we can do is help them identify either what that feeling is in their body when they're about to do something that they might regret, and talk about what they can do to ground themselves. We can talk about the times of day or the situation that puts them most at risk. I don't think any kid does well with devices in their bedroom where they can text something late at night when they're tired. And if there's a certain person that brings out the worst in them, one of my favorite activities to have a kid do is to go through their social media feed or go through their texts and find that one post that is really different than the others, that doesn't really reflect how they see themselves, and then look at what were the conditions in that moment that were different. Was it someone they were trying to impress? Was it a certain time of day? Was it someone who was older? And know that those are their vulnerabilities so that they can safeguard against it. And on that coping front, just having a toolbox. I think all kids right now feel really small and disempowered. They feel like they're at the mercy of their emotions, that they're just hitting them over and over and over again, and there's nothing they can do about it. So working with them to actually have a plan of attack, whether I've been using a lot of strategies that activate kids' parasympathetic nervous system to calm the body, to calm the mind. One of them is to give themselves a self hug. Another is to splash water on their face. They can tense and release their shoulders. They can press on the acupoint below their thumb on each hand. But the strategies themselves are helpful, but even just knowing they have things at their fingertips that they can try, that they are not just a victim of their feelings, can also be helpful in regulating.
So one thing that Phyllis brings up that I want to expand on is this concept of sleep and emotional regulation, because I think that particularly right now, as kids have gone back to school in person and activities have ramped up, we are forgetting that kids we're getting a lot of sleep. So a lot of kids were getting a lot more sleep during the pandemic, right? Their activities were canceled. They could go to bed at a normal time. They didn't have to be up for school or do all the things you have to do to get out the door to go to school. And so as a result, they were getting more sleep. And we now have the fact that they're going back to school and they're anxious as a result of that because they haven't been in a normal or a non-truncated school experience. And in addition to that, they have activities. So their sleep has been impacted. And we know that sleep acts as an emotional regulator, right? If you have an experience throughout the day that was really stressful and overwhelming, and you go to sleep and you get up and oftentimes it's less stressful, that's how sleep acts as emotional detox. And we know that as adults, and a lot of times kids can't make that. So to the example of, an emotional toolbox, what I recommend in my office, one of the things we do is get kids to see the sleep connection with how long the work takes them and to get their buy-in around executive functioning strategies, but also around emotional regulation, because when they're feeling overwhelmed or not able to concentrate, to your point, they're more likely to make, things that they regret later. And then in forms of an emotional toolbox, like what parents can do right now, if you can this weekend, because the holidays are coming up and the holidays always bring up some weird emotions for everyone, right? They can be really happy, but they can also have a lot of different feelings, big feelings. So if you can have kids identify 5 different things that bring them a sense of calm or joy, whether that's listening to music, taking a bath, reading a book, playing with a pet, whatever, every kid is different. And at least 3 of them be offline. And just write them down. And maybe you do it as a family thing. So like and then another way to think about it is, what would you do if you have 15 minutes or 30 minutes or 45 minutes or an hour? Because sometimes you only have 5 minutes, right?
Yeah.
And then helping kids identify who are the people that they can turn to for advice. To Phyllis's point, like, you know, parents often are juggling a lot of things. And so, you know, maybe parents, especially as kids get developmentally older, aren't the person to reach out that they're going to want to reach out to, or they feel a sense of guilt or shame and they want to talk to another trusted adult. So our goal is that they have trusted adults to talk to. So some of the things that can help.
I always ask kids the question to close their eyes and silently think about the adult they would, am I frozen here? Oh, the adult that they would go to if they were in a crisis, because you can't think clearly when you're in a crisis. But I'm also asking that question because I want them to do that reasoning when they're calm, understand that it's normal to ask for help, and to initiate a conversation about what are the types of situations where you might need help, because it's really not intuitive for kids to ask for help, period, let alone to ask an adult. They're usually going to ask, you know, a similarly impaired other 7th grader before they go find an adult.
Yeah.
And then if they can't think, and I always say it doesn't have to be a parent, it could be a neighbor, an older cousin. And then I invite them to come talk to me if they can't think of anyone. I really think we need to be having that conversation about asking for help. It's one of those skills that we want to teach in the same way we teach self-regulation.
Those are such good points. And I know I've heard you say this before, Anna, even with homework. It may be a grandparent or an aunt and uncle or a favorite cousin. Like you said, Phyllis, parents shouldn't feel bad if their kids have a circle outside of themselves to go to for help, right?
Definitely.
You just want to make sure it's people that you trust and know in terms of those things, especially as kids are sharing things that they could be vulnerable about, feel vulnerable about.
And on the self-regulation front too, I think one other thing that we can do for them, in addition to just helping them get enough sleep and to have those coping strategies, is to try to assume positive intent in their friends. They're going to have such a better experience if they don't assume people want to wound them. So I've been doing a lot of talking about how have kids taken a hit to their social skills. Do you think that she said that because she was being mean, or because she's insecure, or maybe because she was a little clumsy and it came out the wrong way? What are some other possible interpretations of that interaction? I will add to, when I have that conversation, I'll say to kids, I don't need you to actually believe those alternative explanations. I just want them to practice thinking about other possibilities, because kids do tend to go straight to that worst case scenario. And what I'm seeing with kids most of the time is that when they do goof up, when they do hurt someone's feelings, they really actually don't even know how it happened. It just kind of was this clumsiness or social awkwardness, insecurity, lack of practice. And then they also need a lot more help right now making amends than they used to, figuring out that path back to peace with that friend.
That's a really good point. Anna, you have something to add?
Well, I think like the point of rewriting the script and helping students reframe things is really important, particularly in this moment where they haven't had a lot of practice of saying, hey, maybe something else is going on, right? And I'll use the example from when I was in the 9th grade. I got called into the dean's office, and the dean said, the girl who has a locker below you really thinks you hate her. And it's to the point where she came to the dean, and I still am friends with the dean. I just talked to her this morning, 30 years later. And I said, I don't even know, I haven't even thought about this girl enough to have an opinion. Her locker is, I'm not a morning person when it comes to the locker. I don't know, whatever. But the whole thing was she had created such a big thing in her brain. She had gone to the dean. This is such a concerning thing. They had called me in. And I honestly was just like, I've never thought about her twice. So, and not in a mean way, but literally in an oblivious, like, I'm so sorry she feels this way. And so that brings me to the point of sometimes when kids, feel like something is horrible and mean in this moment, I'm not minimizing their feelings, but I'm also, figuring out what's the path forward, right? And if they want, I saw something if they want an apology and if they want more than a certain type of apology, I would ask the kid, your child, that is in your world, like, what would that change about the experience for you? And what would that make different for you? And why do you need that? So helping them navigate situations where there might not be a full closure or easy answer, because we're all kind of in this messy middle. And particularly in middle school and high school, as Phyllis says, people can say something clumsy. They can say something. I'm not defending any of their statements. Some of their statements could be inappropriate, and that's a different story. But you kind of have to figure out, okay, where on the continuum of inappropriate or wrong were these? Were they clumsy, or were they, cause for major concern? And if they are on the clumsier end, how can you help your child process it without everything becoming such an energetic, up and down moment? Because you can't call the dean for every single experience, if that makes sense. So not to diminish it, but one thing to think about.
I love that story, Anna, and it made me think of a 7th grader who was in here a few days ago, who was feeling like nobody was vying for her attention. Everybody was kind of making jokes and almost flirting with other girls that they wanted to befriend. And she felt like she was the third wheel and nobody was working hard to be her friend. And I said to her, actually, I think that's a really huge compliment. What I think is happening is that you're so consistently kind in yourself that no one has to be anything other than what they are in your presence. You're just able to relax and chill out and just talk about whatever you want when you're with you. And you're one of the most well-liked people in the grade. And just then another kid in her class came in and I asked her, what do you think about this particular girl, if you had to describe her? And she said exactly what I just said. And again, it's really reframing that we want to validate those are really real feelings. It doesn't feel good to feel like you're a third wheel. It doesn't feel good to feel like people aren't vying for your attention, but our interpretation of other people's actions is often inaccurate. And just even going through the motions of considering other options can make them feel better.
Absolutely. As a parent just commented, these issues enter into college. Kids don't know how to deal with their roommates and so on. So these are skills they're going to take with them through their life for sure. So again, we have so many great questions coming in from our attendees that I want to honor that too. So a few more questions sort of around our title, and then we'll move into some of these great questions from everybody who's listening today. This has kind of been the frenemies part of our frenemies and friendlier friends title. What should a student do if they get involved in an interpersonal conflict at school? When should they get help from an adult versus working it out themselves?
So I'll share another story that happened fairly recently, and it was with a boy, also a middle school boy, and he was pretty upset about a name that someone had thrown out at him that was pretty offensive. And the person had actually, much like the anecdotes I was sharing earlier, had apologized right away, but the damage had been done. His feelings were hurt. He couldn't unhear it. And he came to talk to me, and I asked him how he wanted to resolve it. What was the ideal outcome? Like Anna was saying, we really want to figure out what is it that you're hoping to do, because if you don't actually want to be friends with someone, you're not going to do as much legwork to repair the relationship. You're going to figure out how to maybe establish some distance or, pivot and hang out more with other people. But if it's a friendship that matters to you, and this was a one-off and you want to resolve it, you're going to behave differently. And he was a little bit angry. And I said, it sounds like you want him to get in trouble almost. And he said, I do, but I came to you because I knew that wasn't going to help me, that it might make me feel good for a couple of minutes that he was in trouble, but that ultimately would come back and bite me because I would be seen as somebody who went straight to the authorities and got him in trouble. And the friendship does matter to me. And I'm able to kind of think about how that might end up backfiring. And it was actually a lot of growth for this particular student who in the past might have gone straight to the principal to complain. But I give him a lot of credit for thinking it through all the way, that anticipatory decision making. And through that process of talking, he was able to realize that while he wasn't yet ready to accept an apology that that kid had offered right from the get-go, he knew he was going to accept it. And he was okay communicating that while he needed a little bit of time, he wasn't looking to just terminate that relationship. And so I think that we want to make sure that kids' instincts and decision-making are serving what that ultimate goal is, and that they are going to the right adult. So if it's at school, that kid chose the right person because I'm not a disciplinary choice. He came here to process. And so if you go to somebody like a school counselor or a trusted teacher or an advisor, and you're very clear that you just want to have someone to talk about it with, it can actually be a way to help you self-regulate and not fan the flames on that drama.
And I think that when kids come to their parent or caregiver around these issues, the other thing for parents and caregivers is to always ask, well, how can I support you and what would you like me to do about this? Because a lot of times parents will say to figure out, oh my gosh, I can't believe that happened. I'm going to do X, Y, or Z. And that might not be what that child wants in that moment or ever. And so that's the other thing, is helping them process. To Phyllis's point, what's your end goal with this relationship with this person? What do you want as a way to heal for yourself or heal for the relationship? Because it may just be that you need to heal from what happened to you that was mean, and that's horrible. And it may be that no matter what this person does, you're not going to fully want to repair the relationship, like she said. And so going through that process with this, okay, this mean thing happened. It wasn't right. Acknowledge and validate that first. And then ask the open-ended questions to help coach them on what do they want to happen next, because we can't solve it. And quite frankly, when adults go into certain dynamics, especially as kids get older, and I'm talking about things that are not, harmful, self-harm, like bigger picture, detrimental, dangerous, but we can actually do more harm because we are basically telling kids we don't think that they can figure it out themselves. B, we also are putting our adult sphere into kids' dynamics, which we may be thinking bigger than it actually is. I'm not diminishing these kids' experience. I'm simply saying we have to also let them guide and collaborate with them when we're trying to find solutions.
All right, so we have, again, so many great questions to answer. We're going to speed things up a little bit. Ladies, here's a question that falls into the friendlier friends realm, which is a phrase that my co-founder Bev Hartman created when she was teaching young children at Stanford's Bing Nursery School, where I also started my career. It really doesn't matter if your kid is 4 or 14. Sometimes they do need to find friendlier friends. Here's the question. How do I coach my son, who's 12, in feeling okay with setting boundaries with a kid he considers a friend? He doesn't want to hurt their feelings, but he also really doesn't want to have much contact.
So this is something that comes up at my school a lot because it's a small school. And I always encourage kids to do whatever they have to do to avoid burning bridges, because if you burn a bridge, it's really hard later on, especially if kids mature and change and you do want to be friends in the future, to repair that relationship. But we do want to be teaching kids how to self-advocate, how to stand up for themselves, and to set healthy boundaries. And I think that's one of the tasks that they do need adult help on. And I always tell kids, blame your parents. If somebody's texting you all night long and you're tired and you want to go to sleep, so you have to put your phone away. If you're at school, you can be polite and civil and respectful, but that doesn't mean that has to be the friend that you invite over for a sleepover or hang out with after school. So within the school setting, it's a community. You want to be treating everybody the way you would want to be treated, but you can still delineate between acquaintance and friend, and then fan the flames on the friendships that are friendlier. The friendlier friends are the ones that you want to be having over for those play dates and sleepovers and hanging out outside of school.
I do want to say one thing to continue on this play dates and sleepovers. Especially in a smaller school, but in general, especially with social media today, here's what I've always said around healthy socialization. It goes two ways. So if it's a really fun event and it's lots, you should not have to take lots of photos, post them, hashtag them with the group of people you're with. And I think one of the things that, especially with sleepovers and like things that are longer, establishing those norms for what is posted and shared, because there is a lot of kids who don't get invited. And what kind of community are we trying to build? What is our why for why we're posting? I mean, this goes for adults too, and we know this. There are people who, like, whenever they have a group of people over, they need to take a big photo and put it on Facebook or Instagram. And not everybody gets invited. And I've gotten calls from people who didn't get invited to somebody's Friendsgiving. And my goodness, like, it happens at every age. So one of the things that I also encourage is, I love the idea of, in the school community, treat people how you want to be treated. Really understand that it's kind of like work, right? You have civil experiences, and then you can choose who you want to invite over. Second to that is figure out why or what you post. And are you moving towards those goals of building community and being a positive part of pro-social, or are you doing it for other reasons? So.
Yeah, now, so just in that vein, here's a related question. This mom asks, my 15-year-old daughter is extroverted and eats lunch with a big group of friends, a big group of kids that she considers her friends. However, she's not on the Instagram text group Snapchat. As a result, she doesn't get invitations to all of the social events. Do you have any suggestions for how to help her maybe deepen these friendships? Again, we're going to try to go fast on and Phyllis, because we have so many good questions.
Well,
Sure.
Really quickly, I think, first of all, you need to know what, like, does she want to be, and is she not invited? Like, is it something she wants, or the parent is concerned
I
about?
believe she would like to be invited.
Yeah. Then Phyllis, I think part of it is also self-advocating to see if they forgot about her, or if there's an intentional thing, and do it in a way that isn't putting somebody else on the spot, because if somebody doesn't want to include you, that is also their choice.
I think it's helpful to figure out who is the lowest hanging fruit in that group, who is the one you feel the most comfortable with, and confide in that friend. Let that friend know that you'd like to be included, and maybe they can do the advocating for you, especially if it's someone who you've identified as being really kind. If you could have a conversation where you ask questions designed to elicit those kinds of answers. Who is the best person as a starting point?
Yeah,
that's good. Really good advice. Thank you both. So you touched on a little bit mean kids. The mean girl thing still exists, right? And I'm sure this is happening with kids back in school. This is a really important question. Let's see if we can help. Parent asks, can you speak about kids targeting other kids and trying to guess their gender identity? One student approached my 11-year-old and told him they took a poll in class and everybody thinks they're gay, which was very disturbing. Do you have any advice?
That would be a situation where I would get the school involved and do some education in the classes. It doesn't matter how often you repeat these kinds of messages, they still need to be repeated every year. Things like, don't use words like gay pejoratively. We don't comment on people's identity in a way that calls them out, whatever it is. We wouldn't talk about somebody's learning challenge in that way either. And also just really celebrating and embracing the diversity within the community, as opposed to only doing it in a corrective way. Like when there isn't something going wrong, making sure that these are conversations you're having at home. But I do think that that is a situation where you have somebody who's possibly vulnerable being publicly shamed. And those are the situations where we can end up with kids having real mental health issues, feeling just totally ostracized. And I think we need to nip that stuff really quickly. If you hear about it from your child and your child isn't the one who's targeted, I would really encourage them to circle back to the person the comment was made about. And it doesn't even have to be mean-spirited for it to be hurtful. I talked to a student today, a middle school girl, who said that she walked into a second grade classroom to deliver a note. And as she was leaving, she heard a bunch of second graders very innocently saying, was that a boy or a girl? And she identifies as a girl, and she was sort of taken aback by the confusion of these younger kids. And she knew it wasn't mean-spirited, but it was really, really bothering her all day. So you can only imagine how much it would bother you if it's same age peers and it's so targeted in that way. And I just, that the school has to manage that.
Yeah, I mean, that was my immediate go-to, is that that's not an issue that a kid takes on their own. That's a school issue. The other piece to me in general is like that a child said that there was a poll taken in class. That's concerning for me. And I would be wondering how that all happened, and sort of getting the background. So that's, when you ask about where are places where I think that kids need parental or caregiver or adult support, that's an immediate one.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Really great advice. So we're getting lots of questions about that sort of needing friendlier friends problem. This is a great question. What do we do about a child who is drawn to another child who's frequently mean to them?
Oh, it's so excruciatingly hard as a parent, because you know within about 5 seconds that it's a bad friend choice, and it can take just an interminable amount of time for
Or
your
the rest of
child.
your life for some people.
Yes, yes. And
Yeah.
I think the hardest situations are when that friend is nice to them 80% of the time and only unkind 20% of the time. It's really confusing. And if you're a really generous spirited, forgiving, compassionate person, and you give people the benefit of the doubt, it can end up keeping you sort of stuck in that cycle even longer. And I think recognizing that you can't make your child give up a friendship. And in fact, if you try to convince them to, they're probably going to dig in their heels or try to convince you why you're wrong. It's going to have the opposite of the intended effect. So instead, I would just approach them with a lot of curiosity and say, I'm really, tell me about this friendship. What is it that you really like about it? What is it that you're getting out of it? And you can say that you notice that maybe they're not themselves, or it seems like they're kind of unhappy after they've been together, and ask them if they've thought about that. But I think we don't want to be prescriptive. We just want to make a lot of observations and ask a lot of questions in a non-judgmental way.
Yeah. So what I always say is open-ended questions without a sense of judgment. And in this way, I would also say, where's the opportunity to think about, help the child think proactively. What are the qualities that I bring to a friendship? Who am I in a friendship? Like, what do I, what do people, and what do I want from my friends? And are my current experiences, and then there's where I wouldn't necessarily single out this one mean 20% of the time or whatever they are friend, because I would help them start to see the whole picture. Because they have more options, likely, even if they have some acquaintances that are friendly and generally nice, but also because generally when parents say, I think this person is terrible for you, they're like, now we are going to be best friends for life.
Yes.
So basically where I do is the step back, again, piggybacking off what Phil said, is step back and say, okay, what are the values you see as important in friendships? What do you bring to them?
And sometimes kids work it out. When my daughter was a teenager, there was a girl in her group that drove me crazy. I was so worried about her, trying to decide whether to say something like, you shouldn't see her. 5 days later, the girls walked in and said, we're not going to hang out with Rachel anymore. She's not very nice. So they do sometimes really, they know often and can work it out.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Such good questions coming in, everybody. Thank you so much. Some of them are a little bit essays, so I'm doing my best. Okay. This is a great question. One aspect of friendship is having confidence. Our kids are bombarded with fake, modified, and unrealistic bodies online that can affect their perception and confidence. How can we parents combat that?
So that was what we were talking about in 5th grade health and wellness today. And one of the activities I had them do, and this is certainly something you can do at home, is to ask them to think about what they see as their biggest perceived weakness, the thing that they just feel the most insecure about. And then I explained that might actually be their secret superpower. And let's come up with 2 strengths for that weakness. And I used the example of a kid who has a learning challenge, and maybe they're insecure about the fact that it takes them longer to read or longer to complete an assignment. But on the other hand, they're really empathetic to other students, and they always work really hard. They don't take anything for granted. Nothing's been easy. And so their work ethic is really incredible, and that might be their superpower. And so I did that activity with the kids today, and they really did get into it. And then the second activity, as I explained, it takes 4 positives to make up for one negative. So if you're doing that negative self-talk, or if you're taking in all of these images from social media and feeling bad about yourself or bad about your body, and by the way, it's equally true for boys as it is for girls, I took out a pack of sticky notes and I gave them each a bunch, and I told them I wanted them to think right now, while they're not being self-critical, of 4 things they really like about themselves. It could be anything: their sense of humor, they're a good listener, their soccer playing skills, their hair, it doesn't matter. And what I suggested they do is put those sticky notes either in their binder or on the wall around where they study. And when they find themselves having one of those negative self-critical thoughts, or maybe someone says something negative or critical, that they force themselves to read all of those positive comments about themselves just to counteract it in that moment and get in the habit of thinking more flexibly.
I'm going to answer this in a little bit of a different way, because I'm going to take the social media online approach. And I think that one of the things that I've seen a lot of times for students in general is that they have become such savvy consumers of technology. So I was talking to a bunch of 7th and 8th graders late last week. They all sat me down, and it was like they were telling me how I do my job around social media. And by the way, these are the things that they do at home. And these are the things and gosh, they've read the reports, and that's why they're not using these apps. And so in that way, I also actually would encourage, some conversation about the reality of what happens online. What does it take to create a post like that? Whether that's the lighting, the airbrushing, somebody wrote a really funny thing and said, you know what, if you're able to filter 80% of your photo, you're not what you're really good at is Photoshop. And I think that when kids start to see the reality behind it, right? If you can get those articles of saying this body, and this is what it looks like, or there are different ages, or when we look at television, right? And you have 24-year-olds playing 16-year-olds, have them be part of this conversation of what reality is, because then they become these savvy consumers where they're like, that's not real. So that's one thing that I also think is really helpful from a social media and online reality presence. I actually help them. Okay, well, let's walk through this. What does this really, look like?
Are the kids still looking at that video where they turn the slice of pizza into a girl?
No, I haven't seen that.
I know that video. I'm going to send that video out to everybody, because if you want kids to get it,
Yeah,
it literally it's a video, and it shows what you can do with
you should send that out. Yes, exactly. And yeah, there are a lot of great, yes, that's great.
But anyway, the pizza one, that's a good one.
Yeah.
All right. This is a question that I have been answering for parents since kids were 4 years old. It's really important. Parent asks, my daughter does better with older kids. She's an October baby, kind of an old soul. I wonder if it's better to give her access to the kids she likes most, often high schoolers, rather than emphasizing those in her own grade. Can you comment on that? It's a tricky question.
I mean, I'm a firm believer in taking your friends where they come and finding kindred spirits. I think that's where confidence comes from, really recognizing what you need from a friend and what you can give to a friend. These are the skills we want them to acquire so that when they are adults, they make good relationship choices, or they're in a bad work situation, they know that they should leave. And the only way we can do that or have them acquire those skills is if we trust them enough to branch out and experiment. And maybe if they're 12, that best friend is going to be 13 or 14, or vice versa. I constantly have to remind our own students here that when they're at recess, if there are other grades outside, they can actually play with the kids in the other grades. They don't have to, they're all out there together, but we get so siloed into thinking we need to be playing with the kids who are the exact same age that we can miss out on some really valuable friendships. And plus, for the kids who are befriending the younger kid, again, going back to this idea of feeling small and powerless, if you feel like you're really being a mentor figure to someone younger, or you're able to really be giving valuable advice to somebody who needs it, that can build confidence too. So it's really win-win.
That's good advice, I think, whether you're 6 or 16. That's why sometimes these mixed group or mixed grades can work well for some kids.
I also think we need to remember that COVID is going to change a lot of things in the coming years about grade level and age, because you have, and I said this to my nephew is 5, he goes to school in the area, and the kindergarten class and he's in TK, but the kindergarten class has 5-year-olds and has 6-year-olds and has 7-year-olds. Because some kids didn't go to kindergarten last year or first grade. And
Yeah.
so what's going to happen over the next few years, and this is why we need to be more aware of it, is, find your friends where they are, as long as it's developmentally appropriate and they're not doing things that you don't think are, your child is ready for. They're getting exposed to things that may not be developmentally appropriate. I think if they find friendships that are kinships that, are a year or 2 older, that can be okay. It really depends on the kid and the circumstances, because I know there's a huge variation in 9th graders, especially this year. And so understanding exactly what you mean by what these 9th graders are doing, what their friendships look like, those are really important things before you decide, okay, they're that age and that's not going to work. And I think that's important for us to step back and really evaluate too.
All right. Well, we have just a few minutes together, and it would not be a parent education event if we did not talk about video games. So this is a really good question. Okay. During COVID, we let our high schooler play more video games because it was the main way he could connect with friends. Is it time to pull back? He still primarily connects that way with his friends. My son is in his 30s, and his favorite memories of high school are those Quest video games. What do you say?
I think go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh, okay. I was just in terms of navigating the video games in many ways, especially for the middle school boys or the late elementary school boys, they're still continuing to play video games after school as if that was the play date. That was what they were doing during the pandemic. And it's a key part of that social interaction, to the point that is also the source of a lot of this strife. So-and-so wouldn't let me be on their team, or they said I'm not good at Roblox, or I'm not good at Fortnite, or they made fun of me because I don't know as much, or I don't feel like I fit in because other people have video games and I don't. And so it's actually creating some social dynamics that are difficult to manage in the school setting. But I think that is how they're socializing right now. It's almost like a bridge activity. With everything, it's moderation. And I'm sure Anna will jump in on how to actually manage the time piece of all of this. But from that pure socialization standpoint, I don't know that I would pull it away altogether. I might just take a look at how they're using it and whether it's working for them.
So one of the things we talk about is, compartmentalizing your time. So when you're doing your work, to do your work, and when you're socializing, do socializing. A lot of things that are challenging for teenagers when it comes to video games is that, especially if they're playing with kids that they're friends with that are maybe in different time zones or whatever, they don't really figure out the time that they're going to play. And it's kind of like this never ending thing. So I do encourage them to schedule the time and do it after they do their 2-hour block of work. So once they're done with, the stuff that we talked from executive functioning, the 2-hour blocks with 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off, all of those things, their binder, their planner use. I mean, if that's how they socialize in this moment and they have a sense of belonging and they're communicating okay, and you feel like they're appropriate, then that's how they socialize in this moment. As long as the other thing, it's not bleeding into the other things, which is why I say sitting with them and figuring out, okay, what is your time for doing this, is also helpful. And what are you doing before that? So that once you play, because sometimes that can get carried away.
That's right. And parents, I think, need to understand that if their students have done, as you agree, done their homework, this is their free time, they should really get to decide how to spend their free time, rather than parents saying that's not constructive. At least that's our perspective.
Yeah.
All right. One last question on mental health, because I think this is something you both touched on, and it's just so important. Parent asks, for tweens who have acquired chronic anxiety during the pandemic, do we see it going away when the masks come off, or have things really just been changed forever?
I think we do have to acknowledge everyone's been through a trauma, different people to different degrees. Anxiety, to a degree, is kind of a normal response to what we've all experienced. And I think if there is a silver lining, or maybe a shade of gray to all of this, is that we're really recognizing how important it is to teach kids how to sit with discomfort, how to manage anxiety, how to develop the ability to take the long view or to keep perspective or to figure out what they need to do to feel better when they are anxious. And we know, for example, with anxiety, we don't want them to avoid things entirely because we'll only amplify their fear. But we also want them to take those baby steps in a way that is comfortable so that they don't move too far and too fast. So really working with our kids now, if we can take the time, get them the professional help they need if they have clinical anxiety, teach them the skills to manage these difficult feelings, to manage the ups and downs of life, period, then I do think things can go back to better than normal. And it's not about the masks. It's about, we will then have a generation of kids who really know what to prioritize and know how to take care of themselves. I think things will never go back to normal if we just pretend that it's just going to go away when the masks go away. It won't go away. We actually have to give them the skills in order to manage these feelings.
I love that idea, though, Phyllis, that we can have better than normal with some more education for our kids. Anna, any last words from you?
Well, no, I want to say that, one of the things that as you're navigating this time socially with kids is to recognize that this has been hard for all of us. And to echo what Phyllis has said, we've all been through some form of trauma over the last 12 to 18 months in varying degrees, but it's been very hard for our kids as they're navigating, coming back into school and navigating different social dynamics and trying to reprioritize what's important to them, see what's important in their school setting, and also be navigating like different behavioral issues that they're seeing now more than ever that they might be uncomfortable with. So I think the most that we can do in this moment is beyond acknowledging and validating, giving them skills to look at what do we want for ourselves and our experience socially, emotionally, and in a school or greater community setting. And with that, we can build their confidence as they move forward and as we move forward.
Thank you so much, Anna Hamoyan and Phyllis Fagel, for your wisdom and advice and generosity in being with us today. Again, parents and caregivers on this event has been recorded and will be available soon on our free video library. We just passed 30,000 views, so we know that you are using it, but we could not be more delighted and honored to have you both with us today. So thank you, Phyllis and Anna. Take care, everybody. Stay safe, and we hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye.